Our next presenter with the panel is Jason Robison. Jason is the Lands and Resource Officer for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua tribe. He is a member of the tribe's executive leadership team, where he provides leadership to a diverse team of professionals in the areas of natural resource management, forest management, and land and realty. Jason has worked with tribal governments for the past 17 years. He serves as an ITC board member and as the Operations Committee Chair. Jason is a graduate of Oregon State University with a bachelor's and master's degree in fisheries and wildlife management. Join me in welcoming Jason Robison to the stand.
Thank you, Larry. And can we thank the host tribe once again for this wonderful venue and the wonderful lunch today? So we've got an exciting afternoon for you. I hope you're ready for the next 90 minutes of action-packed discussion on the Indian Forest Management Assessment Team number 4. So the title of today's panel is Turning Recommendations into Action. So I noticed this morning that a lot of hands went up. This is the first time they'd been to an ITC event, so welcome to you. I'm going to get a little bit of a background here to set the stage for the panel today, to give you a little bit of information on what's led up to this discussion. So the Indian Forest Management Assessment Team has just recently, in the last year, conducted the 4th annual assessment. Those annual assessments were mandated through the National Indian Forest Resources Management Act. So every 10 years, the state of Indian forests are assessed by an independent third-party team. If you were part of that team, IFMAT-IV, can you stand, please, so we can recognize you? I know there are a few here. Let's give them a round of applause. For those of you that have seen the document produced by this team, you'll understand the tremendous amount of work that went into this. And I know, Vinny, you spent a tremendous amount of time herding that team around, so thank you for the good work there. The Operations Committee, as well as the Implementation Group, have been working very diligently to work through the over 120 recommendations that came out of the IFMAT-IV report. So there's a lot of work to be done. I also want to recognize, before we get started, all of the staff, the contractors, and our implementation work group that has helped us take those recommendations, develop some goals, and really start getting into implementation mode. So thank you to all of you that are out there. So today's panel is really aimed at providing a comprehensive overview of the outreach and implementation strategies that have occurred since IFMAT-IV was completed. Because there were so many recommendations, over 120 recommendations, we had to take a look at that and say, what is achievable? What can our ITC operations group and our ITC staffing and contractors do in a reasonable amount of time? So we summarized those into 4 main goals. And those goals are supporting tribal communication of IFMAT-IV recommendations, requiring congressional and agency action. So really looking at those items that have some sort of a congressional or agency tie. Improving funding pathways through IFMAT-IV to support tribal self-governance and forestry. So one of the big findings of this IFMAT compared to other IFMATs was a huge focus on self-governance. And I know George Smith is in the room, and he helped spearhead, him and Tim Redenberg together helped spearhead that self-governance component. So another big piece of information that came out of IFMAT-IV. Goal number 3, identify pathways through IFMAT-IV to support tribal self-governance and forestry. And 4, addressing the immediate threats to tribal forest and supporting the unique tribal vision of forest management through IFMAT-IV. So for today's discussion, we're going to have a panel discussion on each of those goals through different lenses. We're going to cover the tribal and BIA aspect, congressional legislative actions, as well as funding and self-governance. And we're also going to get a chance to showcase some of the great work that some of our contractors have done as well. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to our panel, starting here with Sarah and working down the line. So Sarah Cline is the creative director at EcoTrust. She's a strategic thinker with over 15 years of experience working with identity, print, digital design, and user experience, collaborative storytelling, and expedition design. She has a particular affinity for listening to the needs of the group and co-creating empathetic design strategy. Sarah holds a BA and BS in Fine Art and Sustainable Agriculture from UC Davis and an FMA in Communication Design from California College of Arts in San Francisco. Next on our list is Cody Desautel. Cody has served as the Executive Director of the Confederate Tribes of the Colville Reservation since 2022. Prior to that, he worked for the tribe as the Natural Resource Director, Forest Engineer, Forester, and Fields Planner, and for the BIA as a Natural Resource Officer, Soils Conservation, and Inventory Forester. Cody has a bachelor's degree in environmental science from Haskell. Next, we have Matt Hill. Matt serves as our information specialist and federal lobbyist for the Intertribal Timber Council. He previously worked in the United States Senate for 10 years, focusing on tribal and forest management issues for Senator Gordon Smith of Oregon. Matt is a graduate of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. He currently resides in his hometown of Glide in Oregon. Next, we have Adrian Leighton. Adrian was born and raised in upstate New York. After several years working in archaeology and cultural resource management, he switched gears in 1994 and began the graduate studies in forestry. Adrian received an MF from Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Science in 1996 and received his PhD in forestry with a focus in silviculture from the University of Massachusetts in 2005. He began teaching forests at Saylors Kootenai College in 2003, and in 2005, SKC became the only tribal college in the nation to offer a bachelor's degree in forestry. Adrian served as the co-chair of ITC's 5th Indian Forest Management Assessment Team, a once every 10-year congressionally mandated review of forest in Indian country. And last but not least, Stacie Holmes. Stacie is the program analyst forester with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Office of Trust Services, Division of Forestry. Before starting her current position in 2020, she was an inventory forester with the branch of Forest Resource Planning for 10 years. Prior to joining the BIA in 2010, Stacie earned a PhD in forest science from Michigan Technological University and an MS degree in natural resource ecology and management from the University of Michigan. Stacie, a member of the Sault Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. Can you join me in welcoming our panel today? All right, and to kick things off, we're going to start with a little bit of overview of some of the work of our amazing consultants. So I've got Sarah coming up to show you a video that's called Breaking Point of Tribal Forestry Today. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to share several important communications tools on behalf of the Intertribal Timber Council with you all here today. We have a short video and an online website called a StoryMap. In addition, we created an online and social media communications kit that we're so pleased to share with everyone here today. These are tools that member tribes, tribal members, and partners can use to share stories from the IFMAT-IV report in a way that is accessible to general audiences. And you should all have this postcard in your symposium bags, and that's it up on the screen as well. Let's see. All of these materials are directly inspired and informed by the 4th Indian Forest Management Assessment Team Report, or IFMAT-IV for short, as well as the plan created by the IFMAT implementation team. We created these communication materials to bring the report to life and share the challenges and opportunities facing Indigenous communities in stewarding their Indigenous lands. Finally, I want to thank all the many individuals in the tribal forestry community who generously shared their time with us. Many of you are in the room today. To create these materials, and most especially the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and the San Carlos Apache tribe, who so kindly hosted our film cruise this fall. None of this could have been done without your essential contributions. I'll play the video for you now. It's just under, just a sec there. Get back to the beginning. Okay. It's just under 10 minutes, and it's titled Breaking Point Tribal Forestry Today. Thank you.
All forests in North America were once managed by indigenous people. This practice by tribal communities is known as tribal forestry.
The word that we use for our homeland in our language is Jalagawetin, which means the ancient Cherokee place. When Europeans came here, They said that they were looking at pristine forest. And what they were really looking at was a type of agriculture that they couldn't even wrap their minds around, because these mountains had been stewarded to be that way for thousands of years.
For the Hoopa people, we call this place Natanu, which means the place where the trails return. So to us, this is home. We've called it the center of Earth. And this river and this forest have been part of our life since the beginning of time.
Today, only remnants of tribally managed forests remain under indigenous stewardship, like islands dispersed across more than 500 federally recognized tribes. Totaling 19 million acres, these forests support wildlife habitat, clean air and water, and other environmental benefits, while providing a balance of food, medicines, and livelihoods for tribal communities.
The San Carlos Apache Reservation is 1.8 million acres wide. We have everything from timber to desert land and everything else in between.
I grew up planting, foraging, hunting, fishing, riding horse bareback, and self-sustaining. We ate what we grew, we ate what we gathered, we ate what we killed. For me, that was normal. That's what I grew up with. Working with the forestry program, the forestry crews, is for them to use that traditional knowledge to maintain the forest and the landscape so we can still utilize it in the way we traditionally did.
I am Mary Welch Thompson. I'm a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in Western North Carolina. I'm out of this Big Cove community here. I'm a veteran of the Air Force. I'm a gardener, alishi, basket maker. Pretty much everything that has to do with basketry all comes from nature, right? Everybody knew how to make baskets. Most everybody that I can remember, great aunts, grandma, everybody made baskets. My mom did. That's how she raised us. When she went to the woods to get the white oak, we were with her.
Tribal forestry differs from forestry practiced on public and private lands because it recognizes interconnections between all things and is based on respect, reciprocity, and responsibility for future generations. Tribes are leading the way in managing forests for more than just timber.
So our roles in land management, one of the main roles is to bring that indigenous wisdom and knowledge that is still present in our community and apply it. I feel we're at the gateway of a renaissance of bringing indigenous wisdom and indigenous insight to what non-indigenous people call forest management.
I would describe our management approach as a balanced approach. We're managing not just for timber like a lot of places around us have, but also the cultural resources, wildlife, foods, medicines, everything that we've always done here.
There is no greater partner than tribes to bring balance and restore resilience to forests across the country, which benefits neighboring lands as well. But partnerships with tribes must be built on respect and relationship building.
You can't force good outcomes, but if you can create those relationships and create those opportunities for partnership, you can have an effect on those outcomes. So just consulting or having government-to-government consultations is only as good as the relationships with the people on the ground that you work with daily. And if you don't have those, you're never going to succeed. You just can't.
Every 10 years, through a congressional act, an Indian Forest Management Assessment Team prepares an independent scientific review of tribal forests. The fourth report was finalized in 2023.
The Indian Forest Management Assessment Report is important for tribes to be vocal. It's a bugle for tribes, to let their concerns be heard through this report, and after their concerns are heard, it's a measurable timeline. So the federal trust responsibility it's trust. It's exactly what it is. It's trusting that the support from the federal system will be given to tribes to sustain their livelihood of indigenous people.
Over the past 4 decades, these reports have shown there is significant inequity in funding for tribal forest management compared to other federal agencies. For example, tribally managed lands receive only 40 cents for every dollar of funding that National Forest Service land receives. Tribes are at a breaking point. Due to the failure of the United States to fulfill its trust responsibilities and provide adequate funding, tribal forests suffer from understaffing, limited infrastructure, and increased risk of catastrophic loss from pests, wildfire, and climate change. The consequences for the land and the people who depend on it are dire.
We're already seeing the effects of climate on the species that are on the ground now. We're really starting to see an impact on those tree species. We've seen grand fir in the last 5 years just tip. They just all turned red and died.
The main thing that I've noticed about the forest is the lack of it, or the smaller it's getting. Our white oaks are getting harder to find.
To close the funding gap, tribes need $138 million annually in order to effectively steward their forest lands.
So what we can do with more funding would be build our tribal forestry program. That would build capacity, and you wouldn't have one person or two people trying to mend 50 to 100 projects and fires.
One of our challenges is our staffing. We pick from different departments just because we're so short-staffed. My hope is to help give our next generation a forest as well and to continue with it.
I want the U.S. government to put tribes first. I want the U.S. government to put tribes before all these NGOs, and I want the U.S. government to tell these NGOs, if you want a good relationship, you need to support your tribes. It is important for tribes to be adequately staffed and funded because of who we are as the original people of this place. We're still here for a reason.
Funding is important for the work that forestry is doing so it can continue and it will be here for our next generation people. All of this is beneficial to the people and for the rest of the world.
We all live downstream and we all live downslope. Whatever happens to these mountains happens to us. If the mountains get sick, we get sick. These places are where our history is. The way that we understand who we are and how we look at the world and how we live in this world is determined by these places.
Well, how incredible is that video? I once again want to thank our partners at EcoTrust for the great work and insight to put this together. I've got a couple of quick bullet points as Sarah transitioned over to show you some of the other great work that they've been working on with the StoryMap. But some of the takeaways from that video is how deeply connected tribes are, both in their culture and in their management of the land. And I think that tells a really compelling story of how deep that connection is. Tribes are the ultimate integrated land manager, looking at all the resources and all the benefits, all the risks. And it's important to highlight that tribes play an integral role not just in the management of their lands, but in the management of adjacent lands as well. And so there's opportunity for strategic partnerships. It is extremely important for everyone in this room to understand the recommendations of IFMAT-IV and to continue to roll those recommendations out to improve the capacity and funding that is needed to continue to bring tribes up on par with federal government. So once again, such a great video, and now Sarah's going to show you some additional work that they've done in terms of the story map and incorporating a lot of the recommendations and findings from the IFMAT report. So, Sarah?
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who shared their stories in that video. You made it possible. ITC has so many more stories that we're excited to share with you. And so I just wanted to take a moment, if you're not already following ITC on social media, we're on pretty much every channel that you might be on. And if for a quick link, you can just visit the ITC website, which is itcnet.org, and scroll to the bottom. And then you can just find whatever social media platform that you may be on and follow along as we share more of these stories there. And the last thing I'll share with you here today is our story map. It's a public website where we share the specific challenges and opportunities from the IFMAT-IV report, alongside maps and infographics and more. The story map is best viewed on a laptop or a desktop or a tablet. You can view it on your mobile phone, but it's not the best experience. And I'm just going to navigate around a tiny bit, show you some of the sections, and then, again, on that postcard, we have ways for you to share these materials on your channels and your communities, and ways for you to find them again. So you don't need to take notes on anything. It's all online and provided for you. So the story map can be used. You can just scroll down as you go, or if you know there's something you're interested in, you can do Control F or find in your browser to search for the area you're interested in, or you can use these sections at the top, nav. The information is divided up by our introduction, a look at tribal forests, funding, forest health and planning, co-management, workforce development, policy and self-governance, and then the video is it's located online and also inside the story map, so you can find it again there too, and then a little bit about the story map and some acknowledgments under the About section. I'll just show you around one section, and then you'll be able to explore the rest of the story map on your own. But if you click on one of these little sections up top, it'll bring you to that particular section. This one's funding. And again, this is directly inspired and informed by IFMAT-IV. And so you can read an introduction to the section, and then you can click here to go to specific funding challenges and opportunities, or just scroll down, and then you'll get to see a little bit more about that section as well. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Jason. Thank you all so much.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Can we give her another round of applause for her great work? All right, so now we're going to transition into more of a panel discussion, and we're going to have each of our panelists talk about the 4 specific goals that we've identified as an IFMAT implementation team, specifically through their lens and some of their subject matter expertise. We're going to start off with Matt Hill, and he's going to talk a little about some of the congressional and legislative actions that we are currently focusing on and working through. Matt actually helped get the ball started with our IFMAT implementation team. As we were looking at all of the recommendations, the first thing we developed was this agency and congressional action table. And so Matt took the first crack at looking at that and saying, these are all the things that we need to be really touting to Congress, and these are the things we really need to be harping on the agencies about. So Matt's going to talk a little bit more about that today.
Thanks, Jason. I'm trying to avoid mic disaster up here. Yeah, we mapped out all of the 100+ recommendations and assigned, whether it's congressional agency, which agency, or both, or all of the above, or tribes, or whoever the responsibility falls within to. I'm just going to cover a couple of the congressional action items that are not unusual to these discussions. But before I get into those specifics, I just want to make 2 comments. One, that video really is incredible. It's something we've never had with an IFMAT report before, and I think it really captures the spirit of what we're talking about instead of just the letter of numbers and regulations and that type of thing. And it's either on or will soon be on the ITC's Facebook page. So for all of us in the room here that are under the age of 90 and have a Facebook account, or maybe you're over the age of 90 and have a Facebook account, please share it. I intend to. There's 350 people in the room. If we all share it and we each have at least 100 friends, that's 35,000 people that are going to see it, at least. So the point of this is to get the word out and to get people to understand a little bit more about Indian forestry and what it means. So with that being said, I'll get into my part of the presentation. I think I said this last year too, but the actor Steve McQueen, he said, it's not the years, it's the miles that age you. And for me, it's not the years, it's the IFMAT reports. And this is the third I've lived through. I've never been on the team. I don't have any skills to contribute to the team. But the first IFMAT report I dealt with, I was a young congressional staffer, 2003, 2004. My boss, the senator, was on the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, and we had a congressional fellow in our office who was a Grand Ronde tribal member who had gotten a scholarship from his tribe to do work in Congress, and he's like, you got to do a hearing on the IFMAT report. I'm like, the what? He's like, the IFMAT report, it comes out every 10 years, it's on tribal forestry, it's kind of a big deal. And so we went to the Indian Affairs Committee and we said, you got to do a hearing on the IFMAT report. And they're like, the what? And we're like, it's a big deal, it comes out every 10 years. And so they said, well, if you staff it, you can do it. And so the committee didn't even want to staff it. Our personal office wrote the memo. My boss chaired the hearing. ITC testified. And one of the things, this was in March 2004, so it was over 20 years ago. ITC's testimony at the time said, quote, tell it straight, tell it like it is. We want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think that really reflects the IFMAT report. It's supposed to be objective. It is objective. It's independent. It's totally unlike anything that any other land management agency in the federal government has. And it's a very unique tool. And ITC is here to help make sure that that tool gets used, that the report gets read, that the implementation recommendations are acted upon, and it's not just another report that sits, gathering dust high on a shelf somewhere in the basement. So with that, one of the legislative recommendations of the IFMAT report is to fix the Good Neighbor Authority that was originally a pilot authority for the state of Colorado, and then it got expanded to all states, which allowed states to enter into cross-boundary fuels reduction, forest health restoration type projects with federal agencies. In the 2018 Farm Bill, ITC was lobbying to have tribes added to that authority. Even though we already had TFPA authority, we wanted that additional tool just because it functions differently. The receipt retention is different. Congress granted us our request, but they totally messed up literally the words in how they interacted with each other. And so tribes have never really been able to fully use Good Neighbor Authority because the receipt retention portion never got applied to tribes. So the good news is it appears that both Senate and House versions of the Farm Bill, I'll cover that more on Thursday, but it looks like they're going to fix it, making sure that tribes are fully able to participate in the program, which means you have another tool to be able to do work on federal lands and use any receipts generated from the project to work towards future projects. So that's something that we look like we're going to accomplish. The second major recommendation that has both legislative and administrative components is just increasing federal funding for tribal forest management. This is the big one that we're always trying to tackle. And as the video showed and the StoryMap shows, the gap between federal funding for tribal forests and other federal forests, the gap keeps increasing. And there's Part of that is because other federal land management agencies have seen stark increases in their budget, largely driven by fire. BI Forestry has never seen any stark increases. And I'll get into more of the numbers too, but just last week, ITC President Desautel was in DC, as ITC is every year asking Congress for increased appropriations for BIA forests. It's a challenging request, though, because you're competing against all other programs, some of which are affect Indian country in different ways, and you're also competing against other agencies. We just have not been successful in getting any significant increases in BIA forestry funding. In fact, last year we got, in the final appropriations bill, BIA Forestry got a $3 million cut. And the administration's budget proposal for FY25, which is what we're going into in October, proposed a $3 million increase, which would then just make us level with FY23 funding. And if you take into consideration inflation and changing of costs and all that, I mean, that's effectively a flat funding is decreased funding. And so we're moving in the wrong direction, and we have challenged Congress to take another look at the IFMAT report, and really start making steps to adjusting that parity and making sure that Indian forests aren't just operating on a shoestring budget. Another issue identified in the IFMAT report is ensuring that appropriated funds are delivered at the appropriate time every year. Unfortunately, there's not much ITC can do about that. The federal government, I mean, I worked in Congress for 10 years. I've been lobbying Congress for 15 years. I don't think I've ever seen Congress appropriate funds to the Interior Department by October 1st of the year that fiscal year starts. There's always a continuing resolution. It's always late. The agencies are always kind of limping along, assuming they're even open, if there's no government shutdown. And so it's a challenge facing all of the federal government. Congress is really good at renaming post offices, but they're not good at getting the bills paid on time. And other agencies like IHS, the VA, have convinced Congress to do multi-year appropriations so that they don't have this recurring issue of funding running out every year. Maybe that's something we could pursue. But it certainly does have an impact on the flow of funds through BIA back to Indian forests. The final recommendation that I wanted to look at, just from a legislative or administrative standpoint, is the ATARA demonstration program. So this is the Indian Trust Asset Reform Act, which allows participating tribes to enter into an agreement with the Department of the Interior, where they develop an Indian Trust Asset Management Plan that gets approved, and then you can carry out land management activities under the plan without further Bureau or secretarial approval. That was originally a pilot project. Congress could make it permanent, which we are recommending that they do. The Secretary of the Interior also has the authority to make it permanent herself, and we have also asked the department to do that, which they could do any day. So for department folks, remind the Secretary that that's a possibility for her. Otherwise, we hope to maybe get it done in the Farm Bill. So with that, that concludes just a snapshot of some of the legislative recommendations in the IFMAT report. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. One quick question for Matt as we're transitioning here, but Matt, there's a variety of different members in our audience, from NGOs, state and federal agencies, tribes. How can each of those participants help get the word out to Congress about some of these recommendations?
Well, let me just start with funding, which is really, you can't do much without funding, and we have to solve that problem to solve a lot of the other problems. And each tribe, there's only so much ITC can do, and we're lobbying Congress. There's only so many offices we can hit. There's only so many letters we can send. We only get one slot during the appropriations hearing process to testify. But each tribe has the ability to lobby its members of Congress. We've got 535 members of Congress. You know, every tribe in the country has connections with some of those members of Congress. And so, you know, if tribal forestry is important to your tribe, please make sure that your leadership is aware of that and prioritizing it when they talk to senators and congressmen. If they fly out to DC and testify, you know, please ask them to include, you know, one sentence saying that you align yourself with the Intertribal Timber Council's appropriations request, and tell the story about IFMAT. ITC has provided these great tools, the video, the StoryMap. We have briefing papers, talking points that have all been provided to ITC member tribes, and make sure your leadership has those and is able to incorporate those and bring it home, whether your congressman's from North Carolina or North Dakota, be able to talk about this story and what it means in their district and for their constituents.
Thanks, Matt. So Matt was able to walk us through kind of the congressional and agency priorities. Now we're going to turn to Stacie, and we're going to get a BIA perspective on some of these priorities. And I think it's really challenging as an agency to implement priorities when we have challenges like funding and resources. So it's going to be really good to hear from Stacie here on what the BIA is looking at when it comes to these goals. So, Stacie.
Thank you, Jason. Can everyone hear me? All right, great, thank you. Just want to say, first of all, that I appreciate the opportunity to participate on this panel. I think we're going to have a lot of good discussion today that will come out of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide the BIA's perspective and some information on some of the IFMAT recommendations for each of the 4 goals. There was a lot of goals, and we have limited time, so I'm just going to hit on a few for a few of the recommendations for each goals. So, you know, Matt was just talking about extending the ITARA demonstration project, and I just want to share that we're currently working on this with the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs Office, and updates will follow. For the recommendation to deliver appropriated funding on time each year, we feel the pain as well. 4 CRs this year. What we're doing at the Division of Forestry is we're just trying to continue to streamline our budget execution process to distribute the forestry budget to the regions and to the Office of Self-Governance as quickly as possible, and to minimize our carryover so we can get as much of that funding out to the field. And, you know, my position as a program analyst forester for central office, I take this one very seriously, and I continue to try to communicate with the regions, the regional foresters on our budget so they can share the information with all of you. For the recommendation to improve and expand tribal forest management facilities, I would like to also say that in many cases, the BI agency facilities are in poor condition too. And we should address that as well, you know, IFMAT implementation plan, because currently 61% of our tribal forestry programs are BIA direct service, so it's important for those tribes as well. The last recommendation I want to hit for goal 1 was just that one, change BIE human resource policies to better fill positions. And, you know, we at the BIA realize, you know, this has been and remains an issue. You know, we are also confined by the current HR interpretation of the laws and the policies. So what we've been doing at BIA Forestry is working closer with HR to fill positions in a timely manner, updating org charts like Caleb brought up in this morning's panel. And we're trying to develop succession plans so we can limit vacancy times. So there is that pathway for promotion, and there's not gaps on the federal side in the you know, GS promotion scale, because a lot of our positions require that you have a year in grade at the previous level. And then Caleb also touched on that, we're utilizing the hiring authorities that we have to the fullest. And of course, that is up to the discretion of the hiring manager out at the different BIA offices. So now I'm going to transition to Goal 2 recommendations. And the one recommendation that I want to talk about is offering more reoccurring inflation-adjusted funding. And, like Matt was discussing, this one is out of our hands, but I just want to let you know that at central office, we continue to advocate for more money for tribes through the budget formulation and justification process. We just worked on our 2026 budget justification, so it's always in the front of our minds. And, we were successful in getting base forestry program increases in fiscal year 22 and 23 through that work. And in 2022, we got a $3.474 million increase, which we used to boost compact and contract forestry programs. And then in 2023, fiscal year 23 budget, we got a $2.5 million increase, and we used that funding to support our direct service programs. As Matt also mentioned, our forestry budget took a hit for fiscal year 24. We got a $2.2 million decrease in forestry projects, which is not reoccurring money, so that's not base money. But we also took a decrease to the forestry program's TPA budget. This year, it decreased by $911,000 over last year's budget. The second recommendation for Goal 2, improve governance for BIA and tribes. And this was focused on ITARA. And we just wanted to remind everybody, ITARA guidance and a sample template were first made available during the consultation sessions and still remain available. And informal and formal technical assistance is also available to the tribes that would like that. While the approved ITAMPs and tribal forestry regulations are considered proprietary, and we as BIA cannot share that information, tribes could always reach out to the tribes with approved plans and discuss with them whether they would be willing to share information. And I think it all comes down to just communicating and networking and learning from each other. Now I'm going to move on to Goal 3, and the first recommendation I want to address is determine reportable metrics for tribes that emphasize responsible forest management. Tribes continue to question the Bureau of Indian Affairs' use of allowable annual cut achievement as a success measure. And I would just like to share that if a tribe does not want to harvest as much timber as they did in the past, they should update their forest management plans to reflect that. The forest management plan should reflect the tribe's current priorities for forest management, the tribe's goals and objectives. So we really encourage that, and you can work with BIA on that. And would also like to say that AAC is quantifiable, and it's something that we can measure all across the nation. And for a lot of the stuff we do, like budget justification and formulation, I know we always ask for a lot of data, but it's that data, it's those numbers that we can show that we're getting accomplishments with the funding we do receive. That really helps us tell the story and why we need more funding, why we need more people on the ground. So the next one for goal 3, rebrand the BIA to be a champion of tribal forestry. We are really making, I would say we're making improvements on this. Caleb talked about it before. In this last year, we've really developed a relationship with the Society of American Foresters. We participated in their national convention. We're working with them to get the word out about tribal forestry and to reach young professionals. I wasn't at the SAF National Convention, but I was told that the BIA Forestry and the Intertribal Timber Council booths were very popular, drawing big crowds. So we need to keep going with that work. There is a lot of interest out there from people in the profession. And like Caleb said earlier, a lot of people haven't heard of BIA forestry or tribal forestry. They don't know the opportunities and the jobs that are out there. So we have to keep getting the word out. We're also working on initiatives such as funding tribal summer youth camps to teach young people about forestry. Like Caleb mentioned earlier, we funded 8 camps, and those will be this summer, and we hope to continue funding those types of things as long as our budget allows it. And then some of our staff at central office has also been engaging with high schools and just getting out and going to career fairs and talking about what we do as foresters, and talking about tribal forestry. Okay, so goal 4. So one of the IFMAT recommendations in goal 4 was to change AAC rules to reduce overstocking. And what I'd like to say, if a tribe needs to cut more wood in a certain period of time and it exceeds the AAC, that's fine, as long as the AAC isn't exceeded over the longer planning period established in their FMP. So, the allowable annual cut is not the indicated cut. The allowable annual cut is what is determined through the tribe's preferred management alternatives that are documented in the forest management plan. So, I keep coming back to this, but we really encourage, if your management goals and objectives for your forest have changed, please consider, taking a look at revising the plan and revising your AAC. It is a national metric, like I said before, that we have to report on. And then another recommendation along that line was assure that non-expiring forest management plans are updated with tribal priorities. And again, we agree with that. And we offer forestry projects funding, that you can request from the regional office to work on forest management plans and updating plans to be more robust for your forest management. And then the last one I'm gonna hit on was the recommendation to increase the rate of thinning to reduce stocking and improve forest resiliency. Utilization of thinning material is critical to improve forest health. Revise hazardous field reduction rules to integrate with thinning activities. And what we're doing at BIA Forestry, I'm not going to speak for fire. I work for the Division of Forestry, but we're working towards tracking all of our thinning needs spatially. And our goal is to develop a short-term, like 1 to 3 years, or a longer-term 4 to 10-year plan, or end a longer-term plan, so if we get an increase in funding, we know where the funding is going to go to accomplish acres ahead of time. Currently, you know, the way our BIA forestry budget process is, we hear the priorities from the regions, but we don't really, we don't have a good sense of where those are spatially, you know, on the ground across the forest. And that would really help us tell our story when we're working on budget. Share the need with leadership, and that will take, you know, an effort from all of us working together. Again, collaboration, the tribes, the agencies, the regions, and central office to pull that off. But that's really where we think we need to go for forest development. And I look forward to hearing questions and recommendations, and appreciate the opportunity to share BIA's perspective.
Thank you so much, Stacie. So one of the questions I have for Stacie, and she kind of summarized it there towards the end, was, you know, there are so many barriers and recommendations that came out of IFMAT, but if you were to look at maybe the highest barrier that BIA as the agency has to being able to implement and help tribes more, what would you say that is? And how can the folks in this audience help BIA with that?
Oh, so many come to mind. I mean, one of the barriers, you know, I talked about all these things we're trying to work on: workforce development, championing tribal forestry, you know, working on getting our forest development acres in GIS. You know, we need more resources. We need more people. We need more funding to get that done. I mean, we would love to see like a GIS forester in every regional office, for example. Those are the types of things, you know, technology is moving forward so fast, and for us to keep up with it, we need that expertise.
Great. Thanks, Stacie. All right, so we're going to move on to Adrian now. And workforce has been a topic both this morning and part of this panel. And Adrian's going to talk about some of the recommendations that came out with those 4 goals and how they relate back to workforce development. So, Adrian?
Thanks, Jason. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. It's, you know, workforce is one of those things, and ITC, even before IFMAT-IV, we started talking about workforce development, and there's so many different moving parts to it, it can get a bit overwhelming. And we did, ITC put together a workforce development strategic plan, really good plan, it's a lot of good ideas. We, at the first iteration had 5 strategic pillars, and we had all these things we were gonna do around them, but never actually ended up finding the funding to grow the capacity to get somebody to work on it. As we came out of COVID and there was some federal funding became available as IFMAT-IV was about to be released, we were very fortunate to be able to get some funding from Forest Service, Office of Wildland Fire, BIA, ITC, and to be able to redo the strategic plan, to really look at how over the next 5 years we can kind of try to find some of these obstacles and challenges that are facing tribes and move the needle in a couple of different ways. And we really broke it down into, workforce is such a large thing, but we feel that there's 3 components to it. And there's the kind of reach and recruit, which is whether that's youth or being a champion, you know, trying to tell the story of tribal forestry out there to other professionals and potential partners, potential workforce, get people interested in considering careers in tribal natural resources. And then there's the sort of the education side of it. How do we get more students into colleges and universities, tribal colleges, and how do we help the big schools support Native students in cohorts so that they can be successful? And then there's this sort of the early to later professional leadership training and kind of career support. And so we kind of, you know, broke it up almost chronologically in a way of, you know, youth outreach and general recruitment, education support, and then professional development and leadership type of support. There's a lot of opportunities, I think, to advance things in all of those areas. We have so this updated strategic development plan is available now. It was just approved by the operations committee and the ITC board. It should be available on the website. And there's a lot of places where we're hoping, you know, we'll be reaching out as we start to really implement these. Now that we've written the plan, we have to do the work, and we'll be reaching out to folks and trying to get get partners going on that. Some of the other things recently that we have also been able to do, especially in terms of trying to tell the story of tribal forestry and attract folks who might be interested in being part of that, on the workforce side, we've had and there's a bunch of the speakers and some of the students and Yale folks, but SKC and Yale Forest Forum jointly did a graduate class and a webinar series. Hopefully, if you haven't seen them, they're all recorded. We've, I think 7 of our 11 speakers or 8 of our 11 speakers are here. Great leaders throughout tribal forestry. That's available. If you Google Yale Forest Forum Tribal, it'll come right up. Tribal forestry, it'll come right up. We've also, as Stacie was saying, we've tried to really start working with partners who have mutual interests, and Society of American Foresters has been a wonderful partner, both in trying to support some of the challenges that tribes and BIA have in recruiting and retaining, and a great place at their convention to tell the story of what's going on in tribal forestry. I think the one thing, in terms of all these different goals and all these different things, the one thing that I really think that we all need to think about, and if you're in this audience as a partner wanting to engage with tribes too, it comes down, it's not just workforce, it's overall capacity, right? And in any way that we can help tribes and the BIA build and maintain capacity, and maybe it's through innovative ways, it's really important. So, the funding thing is obviously is important, because without recurring base funding, it's very hard to keep a program going, to grow it, to hire and retain folks. One of the things that IFMAT saw, and there's a graph in the IFMAT report, that's rather troubling, and this graph actually also is rather troubling. This shows for the first time in all of the IFMATs, we're actually seeing an overall decline in forestry staffing in the 30 years of the IFMAT reports. The BIA numbers sort of adjusted down as tribes compacted and contracted, but there was a net sum gain in overall staff until about 8 years ago, where we started to see an actual decline. Right now, there's only one professional forester per 40,000 acres of tribal trust land out there. That was 1 to 30,000 acres back in 2012 when we did the IFMAT-III report. So it's grown. We have basically had a 33% decrease in that. It's overall concerning, and funding is important, but one of the things we realize in IFMAT is how the funding request is too. And I know that the BIA doesn't have a whole lot of say in how this goes, but we've seen project funding increase relatively faster than overall than the TPA and base budget. And I think that's a real, in terms of messaging to Congress and to others in terms of appropriations, more money is good. And there's nothing wrong with project funds, but it's really hard, especially if you're having capacity issues. And anybody who's tried to run a program on grants or just general, competitive funding knows that you only get 2 to 3 years of money, maybe 5 if you're lucky, and that's really hard to build a reliable workforce on. And one of the reasons that the retained receipts thing that Matt mentioned in the Farm Bill is so important in Good Neighbor Authority is without those retained receipts, you don't have the money, you can't invest that funding back into hiring people and keeping the workforce going on those projects. Several states have funded 7, 8 foresters out of the ability to retain receipts. They do a project, they hire people who do the next project, and they can kind of keep that going as long as there's a steady supply of work. There needs to be those sorts of investments in tribal capacities so that folks can move forward. I think otherwise, it's just going to be really hard to get that lift that's needed, especially as tribes have opportunities to work, across boundaries and at a more of a landscape level. And one of the things that's sort of really been, I think, a little bit encouraging but frustrating at the same time is that there's been a lot of money through the IRA and the bill funding to support NGOs and other folks who want to engage with tribes, right? And I don't know, maybe, there's a lot of jobs out there right now for people, for tribal partnership building types of positions. The unintended consequence of that is when you have low capacity, those folks are they want people who have experience working with tribes, so that folks who are already working with tribes or tribal colleges are now being hired to engage with tribes. And without some kind of really deep investment in overall capacity, it's not going to have the impact that it really could. And I think some of this funding needs to go into tribes, to tribal, intertribal organizations, and also, honestly, to tribal colleges or other universities trying to support and grow that next cohort. 40% of the Native American forestry students in the country are at one tribal college right now. If we were to invest in a couple of other tribal colleges, that number would only grow. They're not going to reposition. There's actually only 3 or 4 major mainstream universities who have more than 3 or 4 Native American forestry students any given time. Supporting them in building those cohorts, helping other universities figure out how to build those cohorts. Those are the sorts of things that will really make a long-term difference. So I think I wandered off of my talking points a little bit, and I'll stop before I break out the PowerPoint and go full on instructor mode. So, so thanks, and hopefully we can talk about some of this some more.
No, thanks, Adrian. And for those of you that sat through that, you get 3 continuing education credits. So, no, I did have a question for Adrian, and just wanted to acknowledge the great work that SKC is doing on behalf of ITC for workforce. Adrian, can you talk real quickly about the website that you guys are working through, and also how can the members of the audience help support the good work that you guys are doing to recruit talented individuals into some of the positions you're posting?
Yeah, thanks. And actually, thanks for reminding me of 2 things that I was supposed to mention and completely forgot about. So good save, Jason, thanks. One is so we are, one of the things that and Josh Rosenow is in the back of the room, has helped us put together, is tribalforest.org. And it's really meant to be, we've got stickers and things over at the trees table. We want to get people to know that it's a resource, and also ask all of you, as you have, it's meant to be a sharing mechanism for especially around jobs, youth opportunities, and college scholarships and educational opportunities. So we want folks to be able to go there and see what kind of opportunities are available for tribal students, for folks who want to work for tribes, for youth, and either get ideas or try to be able to find funding sources. So if you know of any of these things you want to share, we would appreciate if you shared with us to make sure that we're amplifying that out there. And please, similar sort of thing to I don't do Facebook, so I don't have 35 friends, or maybe that's why I don't have Facebook. but if you can share this out and spread the word, that would be great. And then in terms of other things we could do, one of the things, and I ask all of you that are alumni from somewhere, reach out to them, ask what they're doing. A lot of universities are trying to figure out how to better serve Native students and the tribes in their area. As an alumni, you have a unique perspective, and you can help them. And I would encourage you to reach out. I know a lot of deans, and I'll admit that in public. But they all really would, I think, like to hear from you, and would like to know how, maybe if you have any suggestions or how you can support them. A lot of have alumni advisory groups. Some have Native American alumni support groups like NAU and others. You can make a real difference there. And then also, if you know of people looking to go to school, the BIA Pathways program is wonderful, and SKC Trees also supports students in internships and with tuition assistance. So we've got tables out there for both groups. Come visit them. Recommend folks send people their way, and and always, if you have any ideas or if there's anything you have questions around education or support, just let us know.
Great. Thanks so much, Adrian. Well, last but not least, batting cleanup. Cody Desautel is going to provide kind of a general overview, both from the ITC perspective. He has the unique role as the president of ITC, helping to drive the implementation forward through operations, but also has that perspective as a leader of his tribe. So he's going to provide a little bit of background and feedback from that perspective. So, Cody?
Yes, and primarily touch on a little more on funding, and then just give some context to where we're going from my perspective from a self-governance. So when we look at funding, that to me continues to be the biggest issue, that when we look at what BIA funding has looked like in the 30 years IFMAT's covered. It's particularly when you look at the increase in trust acres, it's gone from just over 15 million acres to 19.3 million acres in that 30-year time frame. And that plus inflation that has outpaced what increases in funding have been, we've really seen in real terms a decrease of about 35% in BIA funding over the last 30 years. And I should warn, I did this last year too when we first presented the IFMAT, that the IFMAT report seems very focused on the BIA and its lack of funding and lack of meeting the trust responsibility. And since Caleb's the acting chief, I rarely miss the chance to take a shot at Caleb, but I'm not going to do that here. So to further engage on how we improve this, I think because I've put a lot of thought into this after the last IFMAT, that we've now got 4 reports that essentially say the same thing. We're underfunded and understaffed compared to other federal agencies. But although that's a very compelling story, we haven't seen increases from Congress for decades, really. So what other ways can we look for funding sources that help accomplish the work that is a priority for tribes? And I think we really need to take a more diverse approach to what that is. I mean, any investor will tell you you need a diversified portfolio, and I think that's something we need to look at. As tribes, we've been very dependent on BIA as our sole source of funding for a long time. And I mean, I think you saw this morning when Larry was calling for a show of hands from different people from different agencies in different states. We have a lot of partners in the room now that we haven't had in the past. And there's also a lot of funding that comes with those partners and a lot of shared interests across boundaries where this work really should be done. So I think those are opportunities we need to think about from a funding perspective, is not just what can BIA do to help meet our needs on reservation, but particularly for a lot of smaller tribes, a lot of their interests lie outside of their reservation boundaries or places that they have management control of. So when we look at some of the priorities that ITC is working on, like these co-stewardship agreements, expansion of Good Neighbor Authority, making permanent that TFPA 638 authority, that there's a lot of opportunity there to look for funding mechanisms outside of BIA to help do that work, both off reservation where tribes have retained rights and on reservation where they do have jurisdiction and control. We've had great partners through that process. I mean, Merrill, I can't tell you how important Merrill has been over the last 4 years in trying to push this agenda. In all the years that I've been working with Forestry, I've not seen an administration that's been this interested in what tribal perspectives are and tribal priorities are. So I think this is, again, maybe a once-in-a-career type opportunity to show why the things we do are important. And I mean, as recently as about a month ago, I think I testified on the new Westerman bill. But language in that legislation that recognizes indigenous knowledge as best available science. I mean, we're just getting to a point where it's not anecdotal stuff anymore. They really care what we think. So I think that's an important thing. And the only other recommendation I'd make into what the other panel members have already mentioned from a funding perspective is for those people that work for tribes, if you're not familiar with the TIBIC process, the Tribal Interior Budget Council, I encourage you to get familiar with it and share your recommendations with whoever your representative is from those TIBIC regions. That we've had a tendency to see over the years that natural resource things get ranked very low in that TIBIC priority process. And I mean, in that hearing last week for appropriations, I mentioned this to Matt, I knew I lost before I ever presented my testimony. The panel before me had murdering and missing indigenous women, it had fentanyl crisis, it had law enforcement issues, it had education issues. There's just so many competing needs for that very little bit of BI funding that's available. We're really just a small pie that we're slicing different ways. So we've really got to look at alternative funding sources if we really want to get to where we go. And now transitioning to what self-governance has been. I mean, we've made huge strides over the last, well, I mean, if you go back to 1975, when the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act was passed, all direct service BIA, very few of those BI employees, tribal people, let alone tribal members from the tribe that you're working for. And you look at the most recent IFMAT, now 80% of those acres are managed by either Tribal 638 programs or even the ones that are direct service. The vast majority, I think, of those BIA employees, or at least half, are tribal members from that tribe, just receiving a paycheck from the federal government. But their dedication, their commitment to their home is just as important. It's the same as those tribal employees, regardless of where their check comes from. So I think that's a huge change in what the workforce demographics have been. So we should recognize that as a success from an Indian self-determination perspective. And we've got partners throughout the BIA, throughout the regional offices and central office now, again, tribal members that really care about what happens in Indian country. This is a very different dynamic than when I started my career 25, 30 years ago. But with that transition, we see us moving from a time where we had no control, all BI direct service, to a time when the majority of programs are operated under some type of self-determination contract or compact, to now what I think we're going to see in the next decade is expansion of those type of authorities to areas outside of the reservation. So when we look at the 638 contracting authority that was expanded in the 2018 Farm Bill to TFPA, I just see that as the next step. And ITARA subsequently passed since then, where tribes get to manage under an Indian Trust Asset Management Plan, and they don't even need BIA approval. So I mean, the amount of self-governance, the control that tribes have over their own destinies, and again, expanding not just from on-reservation control, but off-reservation control, I think in the next decade or so, is just huge. And it will take so much effort, so much work. I mean, Phil mentioned it this morning, who is the next Phil in the room? Who are the next 10 Phils in the room? I mean, we need to identify who those individuals are. As part of this IFMAT rollout, I've encouraged people, I think at the last year, I said, please, anybody who's interested in policy or legislative processes, let us know at ITC. We'll start bringing you with us to DC, bringing you on these congressional trips where we try to educate Congress on why these things are important. Unfortunately, I haven't had any takers, and I think I've testified 8 times in the last year, so definitely opportunity to go, but we absolutely need that next cohort of people that are going to carry this policy level conversation on. So I will continue to encourage, and maybe we were targeting the wrong demographics. I think we've had a couple volunteers since, but it doesn't have to be people fresh out of college or in college. It could be mid-level. It could be people later in their careers that just care, but we've got to have people that help sell that message to Congress and others. So again, I think there's just an immense amount of opportunities from a self-governance perspective, that we're moving from not having any control over tribal land to having the majority of control over tribal land to, I think, again, in the next decade, having a lot of control over what happens on adjacent federal land. But we've got to have the workforce, we've got to have the commitment, we've got to have that next cohort of people to help lead that charge. And I did all right on time.
Right on the money there, Cody. Good job. One of the things, just to follow up for Cody, and he talked about a couple things. One was about strategic partnerships, and I think one of the things that Larry mentioned this morning is in his introduction was, welcome to the ITC network and connection. And I think it's really important as you're here connecting and communicating, is how do you connect and communicate over some of these outcomes of the IFMAT-IV recommendations? So encourage that. But Cody, how can some of the non-traditional partners, ITC generally leverages federal partnerships, but how can some of the non-traditional partners in the room today really help support ITC's mission to move these IFMAT-IV recommendations forward?
Well, I think first it's a recommendation that ITC is an intertribal organization. Our job is to help improve conditions in Indian country, so we really just serve as that conduit, a way for you to find a contact point for the tribes that you should be working with. So depending on where you work, if you're a national organization, we can help direct you to places where that type of work is happening for good examples, or places where it's not happening, where we maybe need some more horsepower, we need a champion. But again, I think there's just a lot of opportunity, and I'm not sure we know the answer to that question yet. I think there's a lot of unknowns, but the chance to figure out how we create this model to work together across a bunch of different funding sources, across a bunch of different jurisdictions, and recognizing that we all kind of have unique talents, and that combined we have a very complete team that has a diversity of perspectives that will improve our landscape management across all jurisdictions.
Thanks, Cody. And so just a real quick show of hands, for those of you that are not related to federal agency, state agency, or a tribal government, can you raise your hands? So for those that are associated with tribal governments, here are some of the non-traditional partners in the room that you can reach out to connect with. So thank you very much. So we're going to go to about 15 minutes of questions. If you have questions for the panelists, come on up to the mics. I think we have one there and one over here. So if you have questions regarding the IFMAT-IV recommendations or anything that you've heard today from our panelists, please come to the mic.
Yeah, hello. My name is Pat Amborn. I'm with Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes. I don't know if you are the people I need to ask about, but I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't. In regards of harvesting forest products, permits in particular, Has there been any talks about trying to increase the amount, the dollar amount? So right now it's $15,000 per permit, $25,000 per year. It's a CFR standard. Any talks about that in this IFMAT or ITC's position?
Let me take it. So we're taking a comprehensive look at the CFRs to see what limitations we have, what things are operational challenges. So actually the guy that was right behind you to your left, Ken Borchard, would be a great guy to talk to about that. Ken, 40-ish changes, 60-ish changes they're looking at for CFRs to help just kind of make process easier, to get some of those roadblocks out of the road. And I mean, a lot of those haven't been updated in decades. So, I mean, what was a significant amount of volume and value 40 years ago is not the same today. So that is in process at this point.
I do just want to say it was a finding of IFMAT. It was a recommendation that it somehow, ideally, not be given a number, but some kind of formula that will keep up so they're not having to adjust it for inflation every 5 or 10 years.
Okay, Monique Wyancoop. I'm with Northwest BIA. I actually have a very non-BIA question. It's about education for you, Adrian, and the rest of you. So it kind of goes with what you were talking about, Adrian, and then also the panel before. I've been talking about this a lot, and I feel like this is a good group to kind of bring this forward. I was wondering why a lot of tribal colleges haven't really been, I've been noticing there's not a lot of 401, 408 trade, like forestry type, getting their requirements, you know, for being able to move forward in their positions in forestry and fire, those types of virtual programs at colleges. I don't know if I worded that quite right. But I've been noticing that not just tribal colleges, but all colleges in general don't really have a lot of online opportunities for non-traditional students. And I've been observing, and this might just be my perspective, but most like mid-career fuel specialists and fire management employees and forestry employees, they have family or elders they're taking care of. They're not going to pick up and move. And so most of the issues I've been hearing about is it doesn't seem like non-traditional, which is a majority of our workforce that we're trying to move up, are actually being considered in a lot of these educational workforce development opportunities. So I know it's kind of a complicated question, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on that because I think that would be a huge solution.
Sorry, it would, and it's one of those things that seems like it would be easy to fix. I know that when I started working at SKC around in 2003-04, realized exactly that there were a lot of technicians out there who really would benefit, and the tribes would benefit from having those technicians with a lot of experience get the 4-year degree or the 2-year degree, so they can step in positions where they can do more of the leadership and the sort of the active management. And we have tried to, that's almost like the holy grail, is to figure out an online or remote way to get technicians forestry degrees. And one of the things that we've really come across is just it's gotten better, but online education in a natural resource field is tough. There's some things that you can do. And honestly, at SKC, we even, in class, one of the best things about teaching at SKC, well, there are many, but is the fact that we can be out in the woods in 5 minutes. So we can actually go out into the woods during class time. So there's a lot of that hands-on, and trying to integrate that into a sort of a remote setting is challenging. One of the things that we've been able to do at SKC a few years ago is we have a satellite campus at Yakima, because we also have a partnership with the Yakima forestry folks. So students can take the lecture classes with us online, but then they can get out with the foresters and do the dendrology and the botany and the fuels work and the hands-on things that really makes that a more successful education. Am I answering this? Am I getting to your question? We've tried a few things. There should be more of it. Honestly, I have to say that there aren't really, SKC is one of the only tribal colleges with really applied natural resource types. We have a wildlife, and we used to have an environmental science degree. We did away with it because our students really wanted more We phased it out. We didn't really do away with it, but a lot of those students were in there because they wanted to go back home and work in wildlife and fisheries for their tribes. We have a hydrology, a four-year degree. We have a forestry four-year degree. And it's because our students want the skills to be able to go back and apply, those field skills. We don't have a general natural resource degree or an environmental science degree. And we've really tried to hone that, but a lot of other tribal colleges, there's only one other, even a two-year forestry degree at a tribal college right now. That's over at Leech Lake. And there a few have come and gone over the years, but getting that, I think that, and again, that's one of the places where I see a real potential for capacity, is helping these tribal colleges who are generally underfunded and low capacity. It's sort of the same story with tribal natural resource departments, is, if you could help build a 2 or 4 year degree somewhere, you can have a significant impact. And a lot of tribal colleges are they're members of multiple tribes, so you're benefiting a bunch of different tribes all at once and getting those field skills. Being able to extend that out is also, maybe part of that process, hopefully now with better technology. But I do think that if you have host forestry programs that are willing to work with the students on the field component, that makes it a lot easier. I hope that answered your question. Sorry, otherwise I'll just keep talking.
We've got time for a couple of more questions, if there's any out there.
All right. Hey there, I'm Cole Jensen from the Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition. And I've been starting to try to gather tribal perspectives on what they need their partners to do better in terms of engaging with them on land management. And I felt like this is a great opportunity to ask around. If you have ideas, tribal leaders, on how your partners can help you better and do better in engaging with you, we've got some funding to get resources out for that. And I would love to hear your perspective. And panel members, I would love to hear your perspective on that as well.
Cody, you want to
take a stab at it? Sure. So one of the best things you can do if you're completely unfamiliar with your tribe you're working with is educate yourself. I mean, almost all tribes have pretty good websites. You can go get basic tribal information, tribal history, what their goals and objectives are. I think many of them probably have their management plans posted somewhere on that webpage. So you can do a lot of homework ahead of time, so it's not just a, hi, I'm so-and-so, how can we work together? That's a very open-ended question, and no offense to any councilman, but you don't want to give councilman an open-ended question. It will go 100,000 different ways. But if you can come in with the very directed, these are the opportunities we have. We recognize you have these goals and objectives in your management plans. We think there's an opportunity to work together. I think that gets you to a point where you have a very productive relationship much sooner, or maybe even gets enough engagement that it ends up in a relationship where you're working together versus just a, yeah, thanks for coming in, we probably won't talk to you again. It's tough if it's just, I mean, tribal councils are busy. They see 1,000 things a day that unless it's something they see that they can take immediate action in that's going to help their tribal membership, they have a tendency not to engage in those.
I might comment on that as well, just in terms of what doesn't work well, and that is when it's a one-sided relationship. So it has to be mutually beneficial. There has to be an understanding of what the tribal goals, objectives, and values are in that relationship. And without understanding that, to Cody's point in doing the research, it's very challenging to just come alongside a tribe and say, hey, we're here to help. There really needs to be an understanding relationship formed, and that relationship has to be maintained over time. So, great question. I think we have time for one more there we go, right there.
This is Josh, can you hear me? This is Josh Rosenau from SKC. I wanted to ask, I was noticing the graphics that you had around parity, and I was wondering if ITC is lobbying for parity with the Forest Service, and if it is dollar for dollar, or if it's even more than $1 per dollar because of the decades of documented inequity that IFMAT has shown.
Go first, then I'll go.
Across multiple IFMAT reports, in between them, ITC has been advocating for that, lobbying for that, not necessarily to reduce any other federal agency, but just to point out that Federal forests all have certain characteristics and should have a certain baseline of management attention paid to it. It's hard to see, and it's not just federal forests, it's other federal land management programs. I think Cody brought up like the Wild Horse and Burro program that the BLM has, which is virtually all in a handful of western states on finite number of acres. The Wild Horse and Burro program gets more than all of Indian forestry for the BIA. And so there's these inequities and priorities that we're trying to point out, and also point out that Indian forests also produce clean air and clean water and wildlife and soil health and carbon sequestration, all these things that everyone benefits from, not just the tribe that the land is held in trust for. So it's a long story to tell. I think we're beginning to get some traction, but like Cody pointed out, it's also hard not to notice that over 40 years of analysis, funding really hasn't changed that much for Indian forests, and so the punchline isn't necessarily getting understood by appropriators in Congress.
And what I would add is I'm not sure that there's not a recognition. It's just not a priority for them compared to the other needs in Indian country. I think that's really the challenge we're facing. And I mean, the number was stark when I looked it up. So 142 million in the FYCR for this year for wild horse and burro management, and I think largely Nevada for the most part, for feeding wild horses, largely. And tribal forestry nationwide got 62 million. So almost 250% more to feed horses than what Indian forestry gets nationwide. And I think a lot of times we're kind of victims of our own success. And I should note too that when I made that comment, I actually had that in my oral statement, didn't even get an eyebrow raised. I thought that would elicit some type of response. It did not. And again, I think probably because what I was following were some very traumatic, very real testimonies from people who had direct experience with either a lack of law enforcement and the consequences of that in Indian country, examples of murder and missing indigenous people, what fentanyl crises look like in tribal communities. So I mean, as important as this stuff is to us, when you look at it against all the things you're competing against in Indian country, it's just not a high priority or not high enough to see increases in allocations. So I think BIA budgets have kind of gone up through time, but they tend to go to other places outside of natural resources. So as hard as we've lobbied, that's why I made the comment about looking at partners and other funding sources outside of BIA, because I don't see that as a pathway to get us where we want to go.
Great, thank you for those great questions. I'm going to look to our panel real quick and see if there's any last-minute thoughts that you have before I bring it home and close us out for today. So, Stacie, any last-minute thoughts? Adrian? Oh, there we go.
Last minute when I can't get the mic on. But just like to encourage, keep the dialogue with us open. We like to hear your recommendations. We like to hear what's going on out on your forest. So please continue to tell us about what's going on.
Thanks, Stacie. Adrian?
No, I'm good for now.
Okay. Matt? Yeah,
Before,
Cody, any last-minute thoughts?
The only thing I'd add is we haven't had a congressional hearing on this yet, so we're still pushing Congress to try to hopefully have a field hearing so we can not only talk about the good things we do in Indian country, but show them the good things we do in Indian country. We've had a challenge with that over the last year, still leaning on at least the House side to try to get that hearing, hopefully something in the next 6 months before the election not even 6 months now, 4 months. But we're going to continue to work on that. And again, to the extent you have relationships with your federal delegates, please share why this is important, and hopefully they will share that with their colleagues in Congress.
Great, thanks, Cody. So just to wrap things up, you've heard a little bit about where we're at and where we're going from here. So every quarter now, our ITC Operations Committee is meeting to talk about the implementation plan that we've developed around these 4 goals. Some things that you've heard today and some follow-up that you'll need to be keeping in touch with is the field and DC hearings, so looking for tribal witnesses to testify at those congressional hearings. There will be additional talking points that will be developed for the hearings and for a variety of different initiatives that ITC is helping the member tribes at the regional level roll out. Continue to watch for the great media coverage and other development of good IT content that's coming out from our partners like EcoTrust. We do have a new self-governance committee that we've established within the operations committee to help roll out some talking points on self-governance and better understand some of the outcomes that we're looking for in that realm. Ken is working on regulatory oversight and review for the 25 CFR regulations. We'll be partnering with the BIA on that. So for folks that have an interest in that, definitely reach out to us. And then we've been talking about a regulatory review and law symposium that might be coming up soon, as well as working on developing new authorizations and hiring initiatives for OPM so that we can actually move on the workforce development side. So a lot of good things still yet to come and a lot of work to do coming out of the IFMAT-IV report. So I want to thank the panel today. Can we all thank them for their words today?